Welcome to Klick Into Purpose, our very first broadcast, and the podcast where we talk about conversations that actually move people and organizations forward. I'm Nicco LoCascio, and alongside my co-host, Lara Klick, we explore what it really takes to lead well in today's world, especially when conversations feel uncomfortable, high stakes, or long overdue. This podcast is for leaders, professionals, and anyone who wants to communicate more clearly, build trust, and lead with intention, not just with authority. Each episode will break down real life scenarios, share practical strategies, and give you tools you can actually use, whether you're leading a team, an organization, or just navigating tough conversations in your own life. Today, we are going to be talking about crucial conversations. So, if you're ready to stop avoiding hard conversations and start leading with purpose, let's click into it. We're going to start this episode off a little bit differently and begin by introducing ourselves to you, since this will be our very first broadcast. So, Laura, if you want to start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. So my name is Lara Klick. I am someone who has been in the acute healthcare world for almost 30 years. I assisted organizations in improving the patient experience, stressful times, difficult situations. How could we take care of not just your body, but your soul as well? I led large divisions. I was a chief patient experience officer and assisted internally using internal consultation to help people to create and streamline processes that would improve the experience. I always tell people that I have extensive professional experience, but I'm also a mom of two big kids now. When they're little, they have little problems. As they get big, they have big problems, so they never stop being your kids. I often say that my greatest accomplishments in life call me mom. I also need to let people know that I have a personal mission in life. So I was already a director at a large academic center when my youngest child was born. And when he was 10 months, he got sick. And my son was diagnosed with a chronic medical condition. He is currently in remission, but he has been sick his entire life. What this did is it put me on the other side of the bed rail and let me see not only from a professional perspective what healthcare was like, but from a personal perspective, what it's like to actually use the system. And that took me beyond just being a professional and made me a zealot. So I believe very, very strongly in ensuring that there are systems and processes in place to enhance that patient experience and all of customer experience, because we're all customers every day. My company is called Klick Advisors. After 30 years in the field, I decided that I had all this knowledge in my head and I wanted to be able to provide that knowledge to other people. So I launched my business last fall. My business is intended to give organizations the systems and processes necessary to create a reliable experience, whether it's a patient experience or a customer experience, and to assist people in creating those processes in a way that are measured and sustained. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what it is that your business does?
Sure. So I have over 8 years experience in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. I really bring a proven track record of results-driven leadership and innovation. I actually started my career as a targeted case manager and kind of developed firsthand expertise in supporting youth and families through very complex systems of care. And then building on that foundation, I went to oversee 11 judicial circuits across Central and South Florida over a program for youth on house arrests where I successfully managed this program, and it's the largest in the country. So really my experience shaped my ability to create practical, people-centered solutions that balance accountability really with compassion. And then in October of last year, I wanted to kind of venture out and start my own company, Purpose Works Consulting Group, where I help youth serving and nonprofit organizations to make sure their programs actually run well. And a lot of these teams care deeply, but they can be overwhelmed by rules or staffing issues or burnout. So I come in and help clean up their processes, train their leaders, and reduce risk so the staff can focus on helping kids instead of putting out fires.
Putting out fires is something that we always seem to be doing, isn't it?
Yes.
Getting yelled at for a living for my entire career. There are plenty of fires out there.
Yes. So, Laura, going back to your business, tell me someone who might not be familiar with what you do or your field. What does that look like practically when you're working with these agencies?
So I have a wide range of partnerships that I can give to someone. It can be anything from coming in, doing an inspirational keynote. I like to say I can keep the room laughing, but have them leave with a skill set at the end. And this is all skill set building. I facilitate and participate in local retreats to assist organizations in developing both strategic initiatives as well as shorter term action plans, which will take the philosophy and put it into place as practice. I also, because of my extensive experience, can provide direct coaching to people who are newer in the role. The role of Chief Patient Experience Officer or leader of patient experience can be a very demanding role with unique skill sets needed, as well as a unique need to have individuals support you. So it's that wide gamut from that macro keynote for your entire leadership team to the micro direct coaching with your local leader. And tell me, how do you apply what you do directly into an operational area or an organization?
Yeah, well, just to back up, it's funny, Laura, I want to just explain how we first met. We were at a chamber event in October, and we both were chosen to speak up. We're probably both a little bit nervous, and we realized our companies had a lot in common, and then we really connected and started to work together and see how we could use each other. So just a little backstory of how me and Laura got connected. But what I would do specifically for if there were things that were struggling with operations, I would meet with the leadership, whether that's a director or CEO or COO, depending on, how deep the issue is, and kind of observe what they do and kind of what's going right or what's going wrong, and then really help implement processes that could help with those operations and provide them templates or policies or SOPs that could help improve operations.
I like the fact that you came back to how you and I met. And we have very different backgrounds and yet very
Yeah,
similar in
yeah.
that both of us come from high intensity, high risk environments. I'm coming out of healthcare, literally life and death situations, came through the COVID pandemic, had the honor, I don't know that it's an honor, of sitting in a command center on 9/11. And actually, I was in the Washington, D.C. area that day and managing through these really intensive experiences throughout my career. You managed children who were in these intense experiences. And of course, it's not just the person in the experience and the entire family. So, from your perspective, how did that impact your ability to help other people being in that level of intensity in your career?
I think I think for me it's funny. I actually was starting off in my career in healthcare. I wanted to do radiology, and I started to work in low income communities, and it was really the first time to see on a large scale of how much help was needed, and it truly transformed my life where I changed my career to social work and went to Florida State and went to a place that I didn't know anyone, and it was honestly the greatest decision I ever made, I should say. And it really helped shape me to what I am today. And it's a learning process, right? My first day on the job, I remember I went to go pick a youth up from a Baker Act, and I knew nothing, really nothing about what a Baker Act is or what to expect. And I remember this kid freaking out in the back of my car, and I had to get 911 involved. And so that's how my career started. And so as you go through those experiences and you kind of you learn a lot and you take a lot away from it, and then you can kind of walk staff or walk people through those situations and put processes in place to make sure that you're as safe as possible when you're going into some of those situations with our youth.
And you mentioned Baker Acts, and so my first quasi-clinical job. So my background, my graduate degree is actually in secondary English education. So if you ever want to talk Shakespeare, I'm your gal. I had enough credits I could have majored just in Shakespearean literature. Graduated when a time when teachers weren't getting jobs. And so back then you didn't move back home with your parents. So I wanted to eat little things, have a roof over my head. And so I ended up going into residential rehabilitation for individuals with disabilities. And so started working with adults that had developmental disabilities and then moved into working with dually diagnosed and triply diagnosed individuals. So working with people, it was right when the drug called Clozaril came out. And for those who don't know, Clozaril was what we considered a miracle drug. It helped people with uncontrolled schizophrenia become controlled. But those individuals then had lived in state institutions their entire lives. So we brought them out of the state institution and taught them how to live in a society they hadn't been in a very long time. And in my day, we actually used to do holds. So one of the first things I had to learn how to do is to do something called a basket wrap. So it was where a single individual would take someone who was having an episode like you just described, and we would physically put them down onto the ground and hold them until help could arrive. That was a long time ago. You don't do that anymore in the
Hmm.
field. But again, this was another similarity between the two of us that we just connected right away. And
Yeah.
certainly when you live through the intensity of situations like that, it gives you a level of experience that we can share.
Yeah, exactly. It's always important to have some sort of protocols or something in place when you're going out to homes and dealing with risky situations.
Agreed. Safety always has to come first. And having been hit multiple times in my career, spat upon, things thrown at me, there's no name you can call me I have not been called before. And I think that the listeners of this podcast have seen a change in our society. So if you think about it, we have a coarsening occurring where it feels like the ability to have conversation and find resolution to situations is just reducing and reducing and reducing. And as we become this kind of binary society of right versus wrong, black versus white, with these opinions, finding that middle ground and finding consensus is becoming much more difficult. And for some situations, you can say, well, you have this confrontation and you send people out. But in our fields and in many of the fields of the listeners of this podcast, it's really about maintaining relationship. And if you want to maintain relationship, you can't have that binary approach to things. You have to have a more collaborative approach to things. Again, but safety is first. I think that the worst thing that ever happened to me in my career is I actually had a complainant at an organization and I felt for my empathy was there. His mother had passed away. And it was an unfortunate situation. It was not an avoidable situation. The one thing guaranteed in life is death. And so she had become progressively more ill, and unfortunately, she passed away. But he wasn't with her at her side. She had waited until he left the room. And so he had this emotional trauma associated with not having been next to his mother. So he was blaming the organization. He was very angry, worked very hard to try to mitigate the anger. It was unsuccessful. And he provided me my son's full name. At the time, my son was 6 years old. He provided me with my home address, my son's elementary school, the elementary school address. And he told me he was on a mission from God and he was going to take care of things. So when we talk about safety, I understand. I had someone threaten my child. And I'm a mama bear, and mama bear came out, have to be honest. And in a situation like that, we're not talking about trust recovery. We're not talking about relationship maintenance anymore. We were talking to the police.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we talk about things like crucial conversations and risk mitigation, we have to keep at the forefront. If you're not safe, you can't do anything to help anyone, whether it's parking in the back or having that personal safety plan or making sure that the person you're interacting with is never between you and a door. Those types of things have to be in place because you can't help anyone unless you put your own oxygen mask on first and you help yourself.
100%. And this is kind of a good segue into what we're going to be talking about next. And we put a poll out on LinkedIn and you all voted, and Crucial Conversations was overwhelmingly the number one choice that you all wanted to hear. So we're going to start by actually interviewing Laura about Crucial Conversations. So, Laura, the first question I have for you: why do you think so many people avoid tough conversations even when they know they need to have them?
I think they avoid tough conversations because they're human beings. And human beings are naturally conflict adverse, especially human beings in caring professions. So if you think about any type of customer facing profession, whoever that customer may be, the natural inclination of people who go into helping professions is to help other people. And so people see conflict and tough conversations as being unkind. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the kindest thing you can do to have a crucial conversation. And so because of that natural adversity to conflict, and because of the lack of training that people have, because we don't train people on what to do when things go wrong, then the human being inside of you naturally goes into a fight or flight mode. So you're either going to flee and do conflict avoidance and remove yourself from that situation, which is not the right response, or you're going to lash out in conflict and become defensive or actually kind of give it back to the person, which is not the right response. And so, because we haven't trained people on the right way to respond, they tend to respond incorrectly, and that amplifies the conflict, and then they have a bad experience. And so now it's not just that they're missing a skill set of how to have a productive, kind, crucial conversation. They also have some PTSD for when it's gone wrong. And so it's very, very natural to avoid conflict. It is much more natural than people who are naturally good at conflict. And so I think no one who says I don't like conflict should beat themselves up. You're a human being. You're a member of the human race. And so we're all going to have that moment of conflict avoidance when we are faced with that situation.
Yeah, and just for some encouragement, if there's any leaders that are out there and struggle with this is something that I struggled with, especially early into my career. And it's something you're always might have butterflies with, and you're going to have to deal with it. And I found, as someone who struggles with anxiety, who had a very hard time at, having those conversations, is the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, the better you are at having those conversations. And Laura, I think you mentioned something so important. There's not a lot of training on this. It's your manager just expects you to do it. So even having your boss sit in and give you feedback is so crucial, because that's the only way you're going to grow in having those conversations.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we, as especially leaders, miss is that transparency is a good thing. So I
Hmm.
know I've led many, many people in my career. Hundreds of people have reported up through me in my career, and I've had to have lots of supervisor to frontline conversations that were not pleasant. And
Hmm.
a couple of things I think are really important. The first thing is that I mentioned it briefly, but I want to reiterate. We think that we're being nice when we avoid the conversation. We actually are not. There's a difference between nice and kind. It is
Hmm.
unkind to not have the conversation because you're setting that person up for failure. It is far kinder to have that tough conversation, even if it's tough to have. So, the first thing that I would say is that as a leader in leadership conversations, you have to start with shifting your mindset, and move from it is far kinder for me to have this hard conversation than it is for me to avoid it. So if you are someone who's motivated by kindness, you have to kind of gird your loins and get in there. The second thing is transparency. A lot of times I started those really hard conversations by saying how hard it was for me. And something that shocks people often when they talk to me is I'll tell them that I actually hate confrontation.
Hmm.
I tell the story. My husband and I have been married. It'll be 29 years next month. We have never had a screaming argument with one another. It's disrespectful.
Hmm.
But I've slammed more than my fair share of cabinets, right? I'm an angry cleaner. So we know when we're upset with one another. But when you have respectful conversations and you're transparent, you say, this is a hard conversation, because I love you, I think we need to have it. It
Hmm.
avoids that really intense conversation. And with a team member or an employee, going in and being transparent and saying, this is hard for me to do,
Yeah.
starting the conversation by saying, this is hard for me to do. But because I care about you so much, it's important that we talk about this.
Yeah. And, kind of a different situation, Laura, but that brought me back to an experience. It was one of my first home visits as a case manager. So nervous. And I remember, the youth was definitely challenging. And he asked me, "Are you nervous right now?" And I could have lied. I could have been like, "Nope." But I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And it built that trust right away. And kind of going into those crucial conversations, if you're honest and upfront and genuine, that's going to steer the conversation. You're going to have a productive conversation. And when we were talking about doing this episode, we were always talking about it is the kind thing to do. It is kind to have this conversation. It might be uncomfortable, it might be unpleasant, you might not feel great about it, they might not feel great about it, but it's the kind thing to do because you care about them and you want to see them succeed.
100%. And if you don't have the conversation, it's going to blow up one way or another. So by putting the conversation off, you're either going to have continued deterioration of performance, you're going to have continued deterioration of the relationship, you're going to have bad outcomes
Yeah.
that will start. And so avoidance, that's why I said coming back with conflict and conflict is never good because now we're screaming, but avoidance is equally bad
Yep.
because avoidance just takes that simmering pot of water on in your teapot and eventually it's going to boil over.
Yep.
So you have to go ahead, and the earlier in the issue you can have the conversation,
The
the
better.
better it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so saying, oh, well, maybe this time I don't have to talk about it, that's not going to help anyone. The sooner you get, in fact, I would argue that the best time to have the conversation is prior to the situation occurring. I teach a framework. I have the trust cubed framework that I teach people. And within that framework, I have 3 levels of confrontation conversations that you can have. The first level is actually before anything happens. It's the collaborative conversation that occurs before you actually have the exchange of whatever's going on. It's called the state method. And it's really about setting the parameters and the framework around what the expectations are within the relationship. And so I'll use an example. Let's say that I'm talking to my child, my 6-year-old child. I'll go back in time and we're about to go out in public to go to dinner. Before we even leave to go to dinner, I'm going to start a conversation with that individual. And I'm going to say, hey, I know that we both want to have a great dinner tonight. And so let's talk a little bit about what great looks like in that moment. So I talk about the facts of the situation. When we go to a restaurant, it's really important that we're respectful of the other diners that are in that restaurant. And then I ask for that person's help. Hey, my 6-year-old, my son's name is Connor. Hey, Connor, what I'm going to ask you to do is if you're starting to feel fidgety, you let mom know I have a couple things in my purse that can keep you engaged during dinner. If you're not able to do that, I tell them what's at stake. If you're not able to maintain a respectful environment at dinner, then I'm not going to have any choice but to remove you from that situation. So I want to thank you in advance because you want to thank that person in advance for their help. Thank you in advance, Connor, for working with me so that we can have a great dinner, right? So I just use that state methodology. We haven't had a confrontation yet. We've had a conversation about what success looks like. And so if you do that, then when you're coming back behind the initial conversation and you have to have a different conversation, you've already set your stage. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can go and you can still say you're uncomfortable, but you're going to be able to have the secondary conversation in a way where we've already established what the expectations are.
Can you share a crucial conversation you felt you handled well, and maybe one you wish you could redo?
Absolutely. So let me start with one I wish I could redo. So I had posted a position for a leader. It was a brand new position. And I knew that the people that were going to begin, that were currently reporting to me and now were going to report to someone in between those two levels, I had to let them know about it. I did so in a slightly informal way. I went into the room, I called everyone in and said, hey, heads up, I'm posting this position. So I didn't have that state conversation. I didn't think it through first. And I told the people about the position. One of the people in the room immediately kind of followed me back to my office and said she was interested in applying for the position. And she caught me off guard. And so I didn't set the stage well. She caught me off guard, and I said to her, instead of being supportive and collaborative, I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And so I kind of, in her mind, I blindsided her. And she immediately began asking me why and why would I would not promote her. And she had all this experience. Well, she couldn't hit a deadline to save her life. And that was the real answer. But I didn't handle that well. And so I kind of got too blunt and short with her because she blindsided me. I wish I had done that differently. Another conversation I think I did handle well is I had a team member who had a not ideal interaction with one of her employees. This was a manager, not the same position, different position. And the employee had said something, set her off. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. She was a new mom. She was tired. She was up at 4 o'clock in the morning. That says a lot. And so when she got this email, she immediately responded and did not respond well. And so she came into my office and we had to have a conversation about, we started with the assumption of positive of intent and common goal. And I said, I know you want to be a strong leader. And then we talked about those facts, but when you respond immediately and I can hear the anger in your email, then your team member can hear that anger as well. And now you don't have a controlled interaction. So then I asked for help. So can I ask you in the future to pause before you respond so that you can ensure you're not responding from an emotional place? And I offered help. If you need to, bring it to me and you can respond with me. We can dialogue about that, figure out the right way to do that. And then I told her that what was at stake was her personal brand and reputation. So if she got the reputation of being a hothead as a leader, that's going to directly impact you. It's really going to hurt. And not only that, if you have an employee that can get you to lose your temper, you've lost your professional decorum with that employee. That employee has you over a barrel now because the employee can come to me as her boss and the employee has a point. And then I, of course, expressed my thanks in advance. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And we had a second situation that occurred and she responded in kind. The reason I say I think I handled it well, however, is because I set that framework. So then when she came back into my office, and I did have to bring her back into that office, I could move to the second stage of conversation because I mentioned there are 3 stages, which is the caring stage. And caring stands for something a little bit different. So you connect to the common goal. You always are connecting to that common goal over and over again. But then I advised her of what I saw. And again, I stuck with the facts. I wasn't judging. You responded again in kind, in a tone where you appeared to be angry and out of control. Then I moved to the R, which is reviewing our previous conversation. You and I have talked about this. We talked about solutions, and you still chose to respond in this way. At this point, I'm going to ask you not to respond to this employee because in the caring stage is that you indicate what it is you're asking of them. You're not going to respond to that employee until I review your emails first, which is a horrible thing to do to a direct report, especially one who's a leader, but that was their choice that took us there. So I indicated what the requested change was. And then I asked her, I got super curious and said, tell me whether that solution makes sense to you. Is there something else that you see that we need to do? Because we want to negotiate a solution that in. And finally, I then had to get some help. So because I saw this in exchange escalating, I had to notify my HR partners because when she did, in fact, continue the behavior, we were moving into the final stage of the crucial conversation. which is that I moved into the tell stage, which is my third stage. At that point, I talked about the observed behavior. I explained why, if it's dangerous, if it's damaging or destructive. In this case, it was damaging and destruction. It wasn't necessarily dangerous. But I talked about the risk she had created for the organization. And then I was empathetic, because you have to lead with empathy. But I let
Mm-hmm.
her know that at that point she was moving into formal disciplinary process.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it looks like in practical application as you go through those three stages of crucial conversation.
Thank you. You mentioned something. So, when is it better when you're having a crucial conversation to pause a conversation rather than push through it?
So anytime you feel your amygdala has been triggered, you're having an emotional response, it's time to take a pause. Because the crucial conversation, I'd say that 99% of the time you can create a pause. 1% of the time you're in the midst of it, you have somebody coming at you. We're not talking about those situations. We're talking about the 99%. 99% of the time, it's not life and death. It's not, somebody, the building's not on fire. You have the opportunity to say, I need to take a pause. I need to get my emotions out, because anytime you walk into a crucial conversation with an emotional response, you are creating an environment for failure. That person who followed me in the office, I had an emotional response because I was angry at her. She had just missed a couple deadlines. I was tired. It wasn't the time to have that conversation. Had I paused and said, I want to ensure that I'm being as effective as possible in my communication with you. Let's schedule time and come back to this.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're someone who's not comfortable in this, taking time to map out what you're going to say, plan where you are in your process, practice with a trusted colleague. Sometimes that's very important, to have somebody to kind of go through it with you. Is always going to be beneficial. So almost all of the time, and how do you pause it? Let me give some keywords, some words that work in this moment. You can say to someone, it's very important to me that we have this conversation, and I want it to be as productive as possible. Why don't you and I both take time to step back and process what the desired outcome of this conversation is, so that we can come to the table already knowing what our common goal is? And just say that, and then schedule it out. You can even say to someone, if it's in that moment of intensity, let's say it's a customer who's at a desk and they're yelling at you, taking the moment to say, wow, I'm having a visceral emotional reaction to this and I don't want to. Can you give me a moment to think? And even creating 60 seconds of pause can completely shift a conversation. So you can create that moment of pause. The power of pause is what I call it, in the moment or in a longer conversation.
Yeah. And two thoughts I had while you were talking is, a lot of times I've heard leaders say, I don't have enough time. I'm so busy. And we don't spend time having those conversations. So I would encourage leaders to make sure that they're blocking off time in their calendar, or however that looks to you, for an hour, just to be safe. Because if you're having a conversation and you have to cut it short because you didn't plan effectively, that employee or that staff is not going to feel appreciated and thankful. So making sure you spend enough time with that individual. And then the second thing is never having these conversations in front of other staff. So if someone wants to address things, you have to pause and say, hey, let's schedule this another time. You never want to address employee issues in front of other employees. It loses credibility, it destroys the culture, it's toxic. So never, never, never address issues in front of other staff, always behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Praise publicly, but correct privately.
Yep. So, how can leaders then create a culture where they feel crucial conversations are safer?
So that is a tough thing to
Mm-hmm.
do. Because basically what you're talking about in healthcare, we call that a just culture. So in a just culture, you have an environment where people can speak up and say what needs to be said. Again, as long as it's related to that common goal, and it's a safe thing to say, including your employee coming to you and telling you that they're upset with you, or identifying a safety issue. To do that, to your previous point, you have to, as a leader, walk the talk. So all it takes is one time of a leader kind of snapping at someone or correcting publicly, and you shake the trust bond that you have with your team.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you say, and never, ever, ever talk about another employee to your employee. All it takes is once, and your employee will immediately say, if they say that about my colleague to me, what are they saying about me to my colleague? It undermines your culture instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's really important that you set the framework within your culture. And then we talked a little bit about transparency. Transparency works here as well. Having conversations with your team proactively. And that's part of, you talked about time, taking the time out of your schedule to plan what
Mm-hmm.
you're going to do as a leader is so critical. And having conversations, because there are leaders and there are managers. Managers react, 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 react. Leaders are proactive. So as a proactive leader, you take the time to tell your team, this is my communication style. This is what I do when I need to have a conversation with you. It's from a place of kindness because I care about you. It's saying to people, I'm saying this to you because I am being kind. So transparency is super duper important. I remember I had another employee who wanted to get a promotion, and she went through the peer interviewing process. Her team destroyed her. They knew a different side of her. And when I didn't give her the position, I had to give her really hard feedback that her team didn't respect her. And to do that, I had to say, this is hard for me to say, but I'm saying it from a place of kindness. You need to know this. And it's because I care about you and I don't want to set you up for failure that I'm not going to promote you. So again, that really transparent conversation with lots of, this is my intention. The last thing is always assume positive intent in the other person,
Mm-hmm.
and get curious. So let's say that you have an employee. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you. And if so, I'm sure the team would be, or the listeners would be interested in hearing this. That the employee that walks into your office and is like exploding in the office. And you have this moment of, uh-oh, and then you have this stop, you can't talk to about this. Instead, get super curious and say to someone, wow, I feel your emotion right now. Tell me where this is coming from. I need to understand better, right? So you move into questions. As a leader, questions are your superpower. Get
Mm-hmm.
super, super curious.
Yeah. I haven't had, from my recollection, I haven't had someone that have blown up that I've seen personally when I was there in person, but I have had a leader that tried to correct someone in front of the other team and the other staff was really offended. So I had to have a separate conversation with the leader and kind of explain things. She was somewhat new that these conversations need to be had behind closed doors, not in front of others. And then I also had to encourage the other staff because she felt some type of way about it. So it can be tricky, and it's a learning curve for a lot of leaders, right? It takes time to learn because they might, like you said, they might not be trained, they might not know, and sometimes they just need to be told. And some leaders will get it, and they won't make that mistake again. And I think going back to also the culture, it should never be a surprise when you're meeting with them and they're getting a verbal or a written. They should always know going into that meeting something's going on, and that will ease the conversation so it's not a secret and you can actually have that conversation. They know why you're having this conversation, and so it should never be this surprise or this secret when you're meeting with them, like, oh, I'm getting written up, and then it explodes and it creates a situation that's not great. So never have it be a surprise, especially when you're talking about disciplinary action.
Well, and the other thing is expect emotion.
Yeah,
So if you are doing a disciplinary action, expect the tears,
yeah.
expect the anger, validate it. And again, go back to, I can see your emotions and I respect and appreciate that. And yet and still we're going to move forward with this. And it goes into proactive versus reactive. So if you do a good job proactively, it shouldn't
Hmm.
be a surprise.
Exactly.
Performance evaluations. Sometimes people blindside their employees on performance
Yes.
evaluations. The performance evaluation should never be a surprise because we're having collaborative conversations the whole time.
Yep. That
So,
could be a whole other podcast, Laura. We'll have to do that another. I have a lot on that topic.
and I think the last thing I'd say on this, and because we were talking about culture and what can kind of undercut this, is as a human being, we have bad days too.
Yes.
There are times we're not at our best. We try to hide that as much as humanly possible. And, when I was really having a bad day, it was when I was doing closed office work. I would shut the door and try and stay away from people so that I didn't have to take my bad mood out on them. Because, you can tell if your boss is in a bad mood within 2 seconds of seeing them. If you do have a situation that you don't handle it as well. So I mentioned the person who wanted that promotion that kind of followed me into the office. I reflected on that and recognized I had done a poor job. I went and I apologized to her. And I told her I didn't handle this conversation as well as I could have. I apologize. I don't apologize for the content of the conversation. I think I was open and honest with you, but I wish that I had done that differently, and I'm very sorry. Having your supervisor acknowledge and appreciate and apologize is a sign of strength, not weakness. And in our culture, a lot of times we see that as somebody who's weak. It's actually not. Being able to come to the table and said, I could have done that better is a sign of strength.
And I think you bring an important point there. As leaders, we're going to make mistakes. And at the former organization I was at, the CEO would always say, "You're going to make mistakes. Don't make the $1 million mistake." So don't be afraid to make mistakes as a leader. It's going to build you up and make you a stronger leader going forward. Um, and then with our last question for the listeners, what is one small step the listeners can take this week to get better at these conversations?
So, the first thing I would recommend in the description that we put into this podcast, we're going to actually put those 3 levels of interaction into the description. But take that state level and find a small thing and use it. None of these things, we started this conversation by saying it doesn't come naturally. It's actually very hard for people to do. You have to practice and learn like anything else. Find someone who's a safe person, your partner, your parent, your adult child, not a teenager. Teenagers, you can't get through to for about anything. I raised 2 of those. But find a safe person, your safe person, and practice. We've talked about training multiple times. If you are a leader of an organization, I would encourage you to take a moment and look at your onboarding, especially for your leaders, and figure out when do you teach this skill set to your team?
Mhm.
Because I'd argue it should start
Yeah.
on day 1.
Mhm.
Because if you're not teaching people how to do this, and it's not just, oh, go talk to people. I mean, it's teaching people the skill sets of what this is. And if you don't have it, it's getting someone else who has it to teach the skill set of what this is. If you're not doing that, then you're doing your team a disservice because they don't have the tools they need to be successful. So if you're a senior leader, this week, go evaluate whether your team has the tools to succeed at this, or are you setting them up for failure?
Mhm. Yeah. And I totally agree with everything. There's also a ton of books out there that can help you. You should always kind of be honing in your craft and improving as a leader. I know there's a book called 101 Crucial Conversations to Have. There's Dare to Lead. There's a lot of books out there that can help shape you as a leader and help you grow in those conversations. And Laura made a great point is finding a mentor, someone you can practice with, because it is going to take time. It's going to be uncomfortable. But like I said earlier, the more you practice and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be at having those conversations.
100%. Well, I appreciate you asking out these questions. And again, both Nicco and I write about this routinely. Follow us on LinkedIn. We both put out information on an ongoing basis. The next time we come together for this podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about work-life balance. Nicco does that much better than I do. So that's going to be a great conversation, because if we want to be our best, we have to keep ourselves at our bests. And so we don't have those bad days. And with that, we are going to end our very first podcast, and we hope that you enjoyed this. We are always looking for suggestions from you. What is it that you'd like to hear us talk about? And we encourage you to reach out to us directly. And so with that, any final thoughts, Nicco, from you?
No, I'm super excited to go on this journey, and I hope you all took a lot out of this episode. And I look forward to our upcoming conversation on work-life balance and continuing these very important conversations.
Wonderful. Thanks again to everyone, and we will see you again next month.
Bye, everyone.